Good afternoon. Let's try to fix all the stuff that sticks up that I don't notice until after the video is already up. Welcome to Solo Iced Coffee. My name is Poet. I'm in my 60s. I'm closer to 70 than 60. And I'm sick and I'm in bed. I was sharing germs with my husband. We were sharing spit, apparently, and I got his cold. He shared it with me. So I have it more in my chest. He has it more in his sinuses. So that's that. I just did a little, 10-minute video on don't be mean. It'll come up at some point. I like drinking my coffee when I'm doing my videos. This is solo iced coffee, meaning I'm usually by myself. However, I do want to get my husband involved because he's such a cutie. Let's talk. Let's do women talk. If you're not a woman, you're not going to find this interesting. If you're a young woman, you probably won't find this interesting. But I found in algorithms and analytics, most everybody is over the age of 50 that watches me. So I'm just going to, this is my story. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a gynecologist. I'm not an anyist. I was a certified nurse aide for a long time, but this is my story about a hysterectomy, post-menopausal, immediate menopause, thrown into immediate menopause, and what that felt like and what all happened to me. And, maybe somebody can relate. It might be some information that's helpful. I don't know. I had a hysterectomy. I was around 42. I was bleeding heavily, like a lot. My menstrual cycles were really close together in my early 40s, and I was losing a lot of blood. Not your typical, 3-4 days of your menstrual cycle, but like days of it, and heavy bleeding. And I started to really not feel well, and I noticed in my eyes where you see pink, mine were white. The beds of my fingernails were not pink like they are now; they were white, and the inside of my lips were white. And I had this craving for ice, which is called pica. When you crave something that's not food, it's called pica, and it means your red blood cell count, your iron count is down. It should be about 14 in women. Your number should be about 14. Anyway, I wasn't feeling good. I went to my PCP for something else, for some other ailment, and I said, I'm kind of like lightheaded. I get out of breath easily. I feel just kind of crappy. Could I be anemic? And so he looks here, and he's like, yeah, you could be. I said, I'm eating a lot of ice. And like, I'm talking like bowls, like cereal bowls, like ice cream bowls full of ice with a spoon. We had an ice maker in the refrigerator, and I would go through so much ice, the ice maker would be empty, the container would be empty, and I would send my husband to the store to buy a 5-pound bag of ice. Like, I was just literally living on ice. I'm not kidding. So my doctor sent me for blood work, and I don't think 4 hours after my blood test, I got a call from my doctor, and he said, you've got to go to the hospital now, right now, and get a blood transfusion, because your iron count is 3.4 and it should be 14. So I said no, because I have panic and anxiety disorder. And I had read that if you get someone else's blood, you might have an allergic reaction. And because I've had allergic reactions, including anaphylaxis, I was terrified of the thought of having another allergic reaction. So For 2 years, I drug out this getting blood, okay? 2 years. My doctor told me over and over again, you're going to go into heart failure if you don't get blood. So we were in touch with my OBGYN, and I got to a point where it was like, okay, let's schedule a blood transfusion. So it was scheduled for a particular Monday. That Friday before that Monday, my mother was at my house and my dad, and I had a daycare. I was running a daycare, and I went to stand up, and like everything kind of went, foggy and gray, and I felt like I was dying. I literally felt myself like leaving my body. And I told my mother, I said, something's really wrong. Someone called 911. I think it was my husband, called 911 at that time. And they came and got me, and there's like, she's in shock. I had gone into shock from loss of blood. So they got me to the hospital, and they realized I had a blood transfusion scheduled for that Monday. So they weren't going to give me blood. So they called my doctor, and my doctor said, no, you're going to give her blood, like now. So they started the transfusion, and they had a young woman, a patient sitter, sitting with me in the room, and every 10 minutes or so she would take my temperature to make sure that I wasn't developing a fever, which is a sign of having an allergic reaction to the blood. So I'm an O positive blood type also. And so every time she went to take my temperature, I started to panic. And then I got to a point where just looking at her made me panic. And at one point I said to her, if you don't take this needle out of my arm, I'm going to take the needle out of my arm. And so she sat with me, she held my hand, she did breathing with me, and we got through the blood transfusion. So my blood count went up from 3 something up to 9 something, okay? Right away. Good. I made it 3 weeks, got my period again, and the same thing happened all over again. I dropped from the 9 right down to a 4, and I needed to have a second transfusion. So I had a second transfusion, and my GYN, my gynecologist, said, we're going to get you into the operating room, and we're going to do a hysterectomy before your next menstrual cycle, because we're afraid you're not going to live. So I had what they call a complete hysterectomy. I had ovaries, fallopian tube, uterus, cervix. They asked me if I wanted my cervix kept or not. My GYN said if we're in there, we take the cervix out, you're not going to have cervical cancer, you're not going to have ovarian cancer, you're not going to have uterine cancer. And I said, just go ahead and take it if you're in there, So I always kiddingly say they gutted me like a fish in there. Took everything out that they could take out. And my blood count went right back up to 14, and it stayed at 14 all these years. I'm in my 60s. Now, that threw me right into menopause. So my GYN said, we need to give you Premarin, which is a hormone replacement therapy, right? It's horse urine. And this will replace what your body doesn't have. So when I went to my family doctor, because when I get mammograms, they find like cysts, but they're just fluid-filled cysts. And I had to have at least one stereotactic biopsy done where they went in with the needle to see if they could pull fluid out. And my PCP didn't want me to keep going through that. So he said, no, we're taking you off Premarin. So he took me off the Premarin, right? I went back to my gynecologist 6 months later. He put me right back on Premarin. So then I went back to my PCP. He took me off Premarin. So I was like, So I had the night sweats. I had some dizziness. I had mild, I would say mild menopausal symptoms. Nothing, I don't remember them being severe, you know. But it was immediate. Like there was no gradual, you know, year after year after year. I can tell you, having a hysterectomy was a godsend for me for a lot of reasons. One, it saved my life because I wouldn't have made it much longer, losing that much blood. Two, how freeing it became to not have to have tampons or sanitary napkins or double underwear, or to be able to wear something white, you know, white shorts, white underwear. How nice it was to be able to stand up after sitting long periods of time and not feeling all that just fall out of you. And you know what I mean? If you know, you know, as a woman, to be able to go swimming, to not have to worry about getting up in the middle of the night to change out pads. I mean, I was at a point where I was like putting pads double next to each other and then double up in the back and double up. I was going through like 6 at a time, multiple times a night. It was crazy. It was insane, the amount of blood I was losing. So all of a sudden there's this freedom. There's this freedom. The cervical lining, the vaginal lining changes because I didn't have my cervix, but the lining changes. And then there is, especially as you get older, as an older woman, there's a vaginal dryness. So you have that dry inner labia thing to deal with. I mean, it's just where we just get dry because we don't have the hormones anymore that we had when we were younger, where we went through all the cycles of the month and we would go through all the different linings. The vaginal linings, they would change up if we were ovulating or not, or, you know, whatever. But just to get that over with, once my hysterectomy scar healed, it took about 6 weeks for me to be able to like really, you know, stand up well and get around well and all that kind of thing. I have one bikini scar, just above the pubic line. And it's now, you know, 20, 25 years old, that scar. And that's the same line that they used when I had my cesarean, when I had my son Kenny. So they went in and they just used the same line. I don't have two scars. My GYN was an amazing man. His group delivered all of my kids, and it just saved my life. But talk about freeing, and the being put, you know, right into menopause. Now, I did talk with my PCP at one point about the vaginal dryness, because it got to be painful after a while, just like daily painful. And so he gave me a cream, a hormone replacement cream. And he said, you just use a tiny, tiny bit of it because it is basically like Premarin in a cream. And I don't want it to affect the fatty tissue in the breasts. So I used it for a little while, maybe just a couple times, 2 or 3 times. And I stopped using it out of sheer fear, like, you know, worrisome, panic, you know, anxiety. If I do this, then I'm going to have this problem. If I do this, I'm going to have this problem. It's almost like you can't win, you know. But I almost can't believe that I went 2 years without getting that blood. And then I went into shock, which is a really weird feeling. If you've ever gone into shock and you remember the feeling, you know what I'm talking about. it was the strange, like literally I felt myself just leaving my body. But then getting the surgery done, I was in the hospital, I think 2 days. And then I came home and recuperated at home. But it was like, oh, it was amazing. A lot of women have problems with their bladder dropping down, especially after a hysterectomy, because there's so many parts and pieces that we have up in there. And then the bladder doesn't have, it just kind of can just drop in, drop down, drop south. And you can have a couple things. You can have your bladder sewn back up into place and stitched up to where it's supposed to be. If it decides it's just going to migrate low, or you can have a pessary made up. Now, so far, my bladder hasn't dropped. I can sneeze or cough or laugh or whatever, and I'm not dribbling anything out of me. I know TMI, but come on, we all go through this stuff. This is women talking to women here. So far, knock wood, I'm good there. And there's something called a pessary. So what they do is they make a mold of your insides in the vaginal canal. Like they make a mold of what your body is like. They do a mold, like a plaster mold, right? I don't know what exactly they use, but they make a mold. And then from that mold, they make this device called a pessary. I think it's spelled Pessary, something like that. And then once they have that contraption, they insert it up inside the vagina, and they put it, your bladder sits in there, and it just puts your bladder right back up where it belongs. I had a family member who had a very dropped bladder, very dropped, got a pessary, perfect, no more problems. And then every 3 months, she went back to the GYN. They took the pessary out, they sanitized it, and just popped it right back in. Insurance covered everything because it's a medical condition. And so if you're running into that kind of problem and you just don't know what to do and it's embarrassing and all that stuff, talk to your GYN about a pessary and see whether you're a candidate for something like that. I know how much it helped my family member. Absolutely, positively. And if I ever get to that stage, that's the direction I would go in also. So I don't really have a whole lot that I can relate to with menopause, other than I do remember the heat flashes, and they really didn't happen at night. They happened more during the day for me. I would just, all of a sudden, I would feel like I was just on fire. And, you get a little sweaty. It's like, oh my God. And then it would pass. But it was never anything that was extremely uncomfortable, or it wasn't a constant everyday thing. But yeah, for me, I had my children. It wasn't as though the hysterectomy took anything away from me as far as having children. I was very sick. I was very underweight. I was, my heart was skipping and racing and all kinds of things. I was pale. I was dizzy. I was just sick. With my iron count so low. So that all got fixed. But I thought, let's talk about this because a lot of women suffer with really heavy periods, and I don't know what the situation is now in 2025 with GYNs, doing hysterectomies and saying, hey, this might be the option for you. But I know for me, it was like night and day. Literally, it was like night and day. Once I recovered from the surgery, I was just, honest to God, to be able to put on bikini underwear, put on a bathing suit, put on leggings, like anything where you don't have that pad outline or anything. I know now everything's different. Like when I was young, we had all these weird tampons with the cardboard. We had cardboard. Now they've got all kinds of pedal fresh things. It's like putting a flower up in there or something. But we had cardboard, and give that to a man and say, here, there's a hunk of cardboard with a string. Do something with this. Like, but there's a lot of different products out there now that are a lot easier to work with. But I just thought it would be an okay topic to be able to say, this is what I went through in my 40s, and this is where I am in my 60s. And so I'm done with menopause. I'm done with all of that business, done and over with. And so don't have bladder issues. Wonderful. At least not yet. I think my mother started closer when she got into her 70s is when it became an issue. I think the vaginal dryness, it's just something that we just go through as women as we get older. But there are things like the Premarin cream, the hormone replacement cream that can be used. And then there's also your good old KY jelly creams and lotions and things like that, if need be, if you're like super, super dry. It's just all things that really no one talks about, but it's like stuff that we deal with all the time. So that's what I'm talking about today. 22 minutes, I'm done talking. I'm going to go fix my coffee because it's awful. And if you care to share any of your stories down below, feel free in the comments. I'd love to hear what you went through. I didn't get my menstrual cycle till I was 14. I was like 14 and a half. I was a late bloomer. And I had my first daughter at 19. I had my twins at 20. 10 months after I had my first daughter. Then 2 years later, I had my son. And then 10 years after that, I had my son, another son, and then 2.5 years later, and a daughter, and then 10 years later, a son. So there was different kinds of births. There was one cesarean section because he was Frank Breech. There was the twin births, which were vaginal births. One was head down, one was feet down. With my first son, my fourth baby, I hemorrhaged 2 days after giving birth. I was home, and a piece of the placenta had broken loose. They hadn't gotten all the placenta in, had broken loose, and I started to hemorrhage at home, and I had to go back into the hospital and get Pitocin for 24 hours, lay flat on my back and get Pitocin to squeeze the uterus to close that opening where the placenta piece came out. And so I had that going on. The other kids, no issues. The cesarean with Kenny, the last two, no issues at all. My baby number 6 was so fast. She arrived literally 45 minutes after I got to the hospital. And I think I had maybe, I don't know, a dozen contractions before I got to the hospital. But anyway, that's for another time and another story. But your body goes through a lot. And my uterus, from all the babies, from the twins, from like everything my uterus had gone through with the pregnancies and all, caused this excessive bleeding, where the lining of my uterus would just get so thick. And it was just time, in order to save my life. So that's my story of how I skirted death in my early 40s. And so if you care to share any of your stories, do that down below. If you would, in the comment box, please subscribe to my channel. I want to try to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of April. Tomorrow is April 1st, April Fool's Day. If I can get about 70 people over the next month, is it possible? Yeah, not likely, but oh well. But please subscribe and like and leave me some comments. Just be kind. Please be kind. And I'll talk to you soon.